You know, I've told you a story before about when I was 5 and we were wondering where electricity came from. My dad built us these buzzer boards, which basically had a battery and a little button and a buzzer, and when you push the button, the buzzer would go off. And you know, we drove my mom and my grandmom crazy, but we learned something. We learned something about electrons and electricity and how this happened. My dad explained it so beautifully, electrons chasing themselves down this wire. And my brother would ask all these questions about how this happened and how you hook it up and what's the buzzer doing. And at the end of it, I would say, but why do they do that? And my dad would say, when it comes to the why of things, that's a question for your priest. He was Catholic, by the way. My brother, he became an electrical engineer, and I became a metaphysician. I'm still hanging on the why. I'm still trying to figure out how the world works, how this whole thing happened. And you know what? Metaphysics, man. So today, we're going into a child's metaphysics. How does a child come to this? How does a child come to structure the universe? The word metaphysics means basically and literally what comes after physics. You get all this physics, well, why? It's basically the study of reality and existence, the why and what of it all. And the basic unanswerable question that we have danced all around and through and up and down on the deep end is, why anything at all? What is this life? What is this existence, this being? You know, it's interesting. There's a, when I really think back, it's this 19th century nursery rhyme. I think it was 1852 it was written, and it was recast over and over in different tunes until in 1881 we get the tune we have now, which is, row, row, row your boat gently down the stream. Merrily, 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 life is but a dream. The life is but a dream part is what got me. And today I have to say I didn't even get it till years after the nursery rhyme had left my consciousness to some degree. That is an early metaphysics. And if you go to the metaphysics of row, row, row your boat, a spiritual perspective, oh my gosh, it's amazing. And there are so many different metaphysical interpretations. It delighted my heart. But today, the metaphysics for children has come a long way. Kids pick up bits and pieces from entertainment all over the place. Spider-Man and now the Spiderverses, Doctor Strange, man, if you haven't seen any of those, wow, what special effects. Time travel, warp speed, and quantum jumping through space, on and on. Our children are being exposed to this. They don't get what's happening. They hear the story, but it's happening. Now, recently, while reading to my grandson, his name's Beauregard, we call him Bo, I stumbled upon this wonderful source of today's children's metaphysics. A child's view, if you will. It came from a graphic novel written for 7 to 10-year-olds by the name of Dave Pilkey. He writes 3 different series, Dog Man, Cat Kid, and Captain Underpants. And my journey with my grandkids started with time travel in a series called Captain Underpants, and it's full of shifts of consciousness, people waking and going back to sleep, full of existential dilemmas from absurd monsters and how time tripping and talking with our future and past selves can help. But last week, maybe it was 2 weeks ago, we were at a comic book store, Merlin's. If you're in Spokane, check it out. And he spotted the latest graphic novel of Cat Kid Comic Club, Influencers. We got it, and we read it. My view, say what? It would be difficult for me to try and describe the characters and stories, as the whole point of Pilkey's writings and drawings is to celebrate creativity in storytelling, getting kids to think this way. Simply, the comic club has these characters, the main ones are little Petey, Flippy, and Molly, and they're teaching these 21 baby frogs, they're tadpoles, the art of writing comic books. The latest book, Influencers, takes the reader right up against a few of the biggest metaphysical questions and issues that humankind have ever had. One of the stories within the bigger story, because basically they're teaching kids how to write these stories, and the kids are writing them. And it's a story where two tadpoles, the Hacker brothers, they write this story about Robo Chubbs, a Chubbs McSpiderbutt graphic novella. So this is a story about where we find ourselves with McSpiderbutt, who's basically a spider with a human, like the horse that has the human part. It's like that, but with a spider body. And he's in conversation with a child spider. And this robot is trying to kill them, but hasn't found them yet. So this is basically where they are, and they're having this conversation as they build a snow person. So here we go. Hey, Chubbs. Yeah, Jake. Do you think there's an inherent order to the universe, or is it just all luck, chaos? Is that all it is? Gee, I don't know, little buddy. I mean, sometimes life feels purposeful, as if it's being guided towards a higher ideal, but other times, everything feels rather senseless and random. Maybe it depends on how we look at it. What do you mean, Jake? Perhaps our viewpoints influence our experience. Gee, that's pretty deep, Jake. Well, if it's true that mere observation can alter a quantum state, then it's reasonable to conclude that our perceptions may affect our reality. Are you suggesting that our universal existential truth may hinge on what we choose to believe? I believe I am, Chubbs. I believe I am. Come on, 7 to 10-year-olds. Although I have to say, that was the part my grandkid, he's 5, wanted me to read again. And I don't think he understood what it was all about. But it doesn't matter. It raised in me some WTFs. My 5-year-old grandson loved this. He didn't understand it. But McSpiderbutt, he and Jake, they were having a conversation. It wasn't until years later that I got merrily, 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 life is but a dream. And in my mind, our children are being prepared for a much greater understanding of the metaphysical ocean we all swim in. Reminds me of a song by David Weiss and Bob Thiel. Most of us know it from Louis Armstrong, but the last verse goes, I hear babies cry, I watch them grow, they'll learn much more than I'll ever know. And I think to myself, what a wonderful world. I sing that song probably once a week. I'm still working on the piano part, but man, I'm telling you, the bigger questions are coming so much closer now. So much closer. And today, I just want to do 2 things. I want to celebrate and ponder. What is next? How are we introducing our children to the unanswerable questions, those parts of life that ask why anything at all? What's the point of it? How do we influence it? How does it influence us? These questions that, and one of the biggest critiques of metaphysics is that it gives you a lot of knowledge without giving you any knowledge, and there's nowhere to root it. But I think that metaphysics is the aspirational reaching. Once we have the physics, once we have what we have and the quantum stuff, where does it end up? It ends up in stories. It ends up in informing how we ourselves live. As Petey said, does our own perception affect how we experience it? And does our own experience feed back in some way? Wow. Those are deep questions. Those are questions I didn't get to in college. And here is my 5-year-old saying, can you read that again? And I know there's no way he can understand it. But maybe it's just that young people like that are still in touch with the home planet, and there's an intuitive piece that comes to them that makes them say, yeah, that makes sense. I will say this. Now when Bo says that his cousins are mean to him, I say what you can say to them is you're not being a very good influence. And talk to them about influencing. Are we influencing the world? Are we not? I don't know. I think probably we are. How that happens, I don't know. But I will say this, the fact that our children are being entertained. I got turned on to Captain Underpants by a girl who was 8 years old in my congregation. We talked about books we were reading, and she brought one to me, and I read it, and I went, I can't believe this is crazy. She's in college now, by the way. So my cohorts today, as usual, are Marianne Rudis coming to us from the Spokane Valley, and Bob Hayes coming to us all the way transcontinentally from Florida. And my name is Red Hawk, and we are hanging at the deep end and just entertaining those things, thoughts, processes that life cannot do without, that are so integral to life that you got to talk about them, And we're just three regular people who've lived our lives reflectively, contemplatively, and we're still going, what the F is going on here? How do we even talk about this? So, a child's metaphysic. Marianne, I'll start with you. What say you with all this shotgun blast of perspective, if you will?
Well, I have one word, wow. You're right. I think I wasn't raised with questioning. I was raised with prescriptions and told what the way the world was and what I needed to do to fit in it. And so to have these questions out there at a young age for kids to be thinking about and contemplating, and we've talked about this before, a lot of the things that we talk about on the deep end, it's hard to find other people that want to engage in these kind of conversations. But it sounds like there's a whole generation coming up that is going to be doing just that, engaging in these kind of conversations. And it's exciting, and it's interesting, but it's also a bit untethered and chaotic because kids, you're trying to figure out what the world is, and I think there's power in saying and I love that you told your grandson to say what kind of an influencer are you being, to be able to recognize that all of our actions, the things that we do, the way we see the world is influencing the world. It's influencing the people around us. And I think that's something that I wasn't taught when I was a child. And so I think it's pretty interesting. So.
Yeah. Bob, what say you on this?
I say that this is very, very exciting, and it's something that some of us have known, and when I say us, I mean the human family, have known for generations. It's no coincidence that Jesus said that we needed to become like little children. And it's no coincidence that Carl Jung talked about how we move from being part of nature to being separate from nature and then search for our way to get back. Children are born part of nature, as we all are. But as we grow, we start finding ways to deny that connection with nature. As Marianne, you were just saying, there's already rules out there. You just follow these rules. Here they are. Well, children are naturally rebellious. They don't want to follow the rules. They have to be forced into it. And there's a necessity for that to a large extent, or it would be total chaos. But I think what these books, and I'd never heard of them until Red Hawk, you just mentioned them, I think what they're trying to get at is trying to find a way to keep the child open, to keep the child questioning, rather than cut them off, rather than force them into narrower and narrower paths, into tighter and tighter boxes. Because it's those boxes that, as adults, we feel comfortable. And we've talked many times about how we don't want to lose our comfort. So if we force our children into the pattern that we've already established and that we've been forced into, then it makes us more comfortable. But we really need to break out of those patterns if we're going to get new ideas and new ways of dealing with the world. So I find this very, very exciting. And hopefully, and I'm a statistics numbers guy, so I hope that the critical mass of the population is moving in that direction. And it's not just a few people who say, oh, let them be like little children and then move on to some other passage in the Bible or whatever. So I think this is a very exciting topic.
Well, and there's two things that Pilkey keeps lifting up, even in the midst of these graphic comics, and that's creativity and storytelling. He's really asking kids to look at things differently. And believe me, if you just look at the characters, I mean, Flippy in Cat Kid is a fish that has two robo arms. They live in a little trailer that has an upstairs and a downstairs. I mean, it's like Harry Potter stuff. It's creativity. It's creating characters and embedding a story. There's even one story about why babies and kittens create an emotional response in us. It's basically a tadpole giving a lesson and explaining how we are neurologically wired to respond in a certain way. So I think that a couple things, creativity and storytelling, I think are huge. The other one is return. This gets back to myth. This gets back to, I see little babies and their hair is like pointed up in their head. They've got it, and I go, oh, still in touch with the home planet. These babies, these children. What was it the little boy said to his sister when he was alone? He says, I'm beginning to forget what God looks like. Can you remind me? Over and over, it seems to me we come, through nature, out of nature, into nature, and then we are weaned, as Bob, you were intoning, into a cultural milieu that has many inconsistencies with the very source of who we are. And that return is everything. And the metaphysical piece is huge because mostly it's subjective.
And a lot of the conflict in the world is because different cultures, different groups have their own little set of rules that they believe are the only ones that are valid, and that anybody that doesn't have those rules is wrong, or maybe they define it as evil. And I think that the idea of a child's metaphysics is that all the rules are equally valid and equally wrong, and that the stories that we tell are helping us pit those different rules against each other and see where the similarities and the differences and the truths, maybe with a capital T, lie in all of them. And that's the child's strength, is being able to do that, being able to, you put a bunch of children together from different races, different cultures and so forth, and they all figure out a way to get along. it's when we start pulling them out of that fellowship, for want of a better word, and say, well, no, you have to do it this way, and these people are trying to get you to do it the wrong way, and then suddenly they're not getting along anymore.
Yeah, Lord of the Flies.
There you go.
Marianne?
Well, you know, and the whole idea of these stories, and I'm with you, Bob. I don't have little kids around me, so Red Hawk, you're our introduction to these stories. But the creativity involved and the bending of what we think a tadpole looks like, or whatever has the robotic arms or whatever. And I was just reading something about syntax. And when we construct sentences, we put them together in a certain way to convey a certain thing. And as an exercise, to take those words that you've written and mix them all up, take them out of syntax, and it shifts something in your brain. And so I think these kids are being, they're retaining something that we teach out of, we teach it out of kids. And so I think that the whole idea of creating, and when we do that, we see that we're creating these rules, that they are something that it is our point of view. It's not set in stone. It's something that we've created and that can be recreated and changed and looked at differently.
Yeah.
So it's exciting. Yeah.
And that gets into the whole concept of resilience. If you can build in that to kids versus a rigidity. If you look at second graders and you ask everybody in that, if they're into science and how things work, everybody will raise their hand. If you talk to second graders and say, how many of you see yourself as artists? Just about everybody will raise their hand. By the time they're in the seventh grade, that number has dwindled to a fraction on both fronts, science and art. So I think we're making a very valid point that we do seem to grow people out of this stuff. And what we need is more stories and graphic novellas and movies that expand us, that open us up. Now, I'm going to suggest a 5-minute video to our listeners. It's called A Child's Metaphysical by Kodomo no Kijogaku, something like that. It's 5 minutes. It's really interesting because it's almost like these are the kind of changes a kid goes through, turning themselves inside out, seeing themselves connected to everything, creating associations with the world that seem so absurd to us, but children are doing it over and over, creating whole universes. I watched the history of Lego. Lego was very interesting. And in the 60s, they introduced something that changed the whole way that children played with Legos. Actually, I think it was in the 80s, excuse me. And that was the little Lego person. Before that, Legos was a building thing. You built your stuff. Once you created a person, literally the whole context for play shifted in the Lego universe. And go to a Lego store if you want to see some creativity and storytelling. My grandkid, he and Grandma have built these Lego castles, and he just pulls them out. He's having conversations. He's having action. My wife has a dollhouse that her granddad built. Every week, just about, he'll say, let's go play in the dollhouse. He's got some stuff going. He's got a whole routine, a narrative, and he wants to continue it and continue the life in that dollhouse. It blows me away to see how natural this creativity is. And sometimes I'll try to get him to tell me what's going on so he can tell the story. And sometimes he does good and sometimes not. But to try to grow that, to breed it, to, like Marianne said, we weren't really given the opportunity to question for a lot of us. Although I have to say, my dad was pretty good. I remember when we asked him about photosynthesis. I was probably 8 or 9. And he said, well, we don't know yet. It's still a theory. And then he goes on to explain it, which, of course, it's not a theory anymore. It's been proven. The whole concept of inviting questions and opening a child up to, the big ones. Why do you think there's anything at all? I remember in a congregation that I led for a while. It was called Nashville Spiritual Community. And after worshiping one day, this little girl, she was 6. She comes up, she goes, so Red Hawk, who made God? Well, boy, I said, man, now that's one I've been working on for my whole life. Don't forget that question. Keep it alive, because I think we might have, but I don't know that. And when we start seeing God as being and not as a being outside of space and time, but being itself, something starts lighting up in us, a quality of our own being that calls us to be responsible, that calls us to question, and that calls us to be creative in our responses. The word I'm trying to teach Bo right now is repertoire. And he can't quite say it, but I want him to see that we're creating a repertoire of responses, different ways of responding to the world and not getting stuck in one thing. We are working on trying every brand of bubble gum I can get my hands on. And I said, we're expanding our repertoire of bubble gum experience. He still can't say the word, but he wants a piece of it. The way that we relate to the world really does, in my mind, have an effect upon it, and it informs the way that we receive it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
It sure does. And, these things, I admire you, and I am somewhat jealous that you're able to have these experiences with Bo. And I think it's really, really amazing. And I think about the seeds that we plant in our children, that we may not know what is going to sprout from them. But later on, if you really think about it, you'll see things that you can trace back to Captain Underpants in this case. I think of the cartoon that Harry Nielsen put out in the early 70s called The Point, which is a really heavy-duty childhood metaphysic. And there was a character called the Rock Man, when the hero of the cartoon meets the Rock Man, and the Rock Man says, you see what you want to see, and you hear what you want to hear. And that didn't really blossom in my own philosophy until later on in college. I was taking sensation and perception, and I found out that that's the way we're wired. We're wired to see what we think we're going to see, and to hear what we think we're going to see what we think we're going to see, and hear what we think we're going to hear. That's the way the human nervous system works. And those little seeds that are planted early on can have huge effects later.
Amen. So we're coming to the end of our time. Well, if it's true that mere observation can alter a quantum state, then it's reasonable to conclude that our perceptions may affect our reality. Are you suggesting that our universal existential truth may hinge on what we choose to believe? I believe I am, Chubbs. I believe I am. All I can say is amen. Marianne, final comments?
I think the way we see things hinges on how we answer those questions. Why are we here? And what is this all about? And my big question has always been, even if I don't know the answers to those, what do I do with it? What do I do with this life? And that is going to come from observation, perceptions, and then choices that are made. And let's not ever stop asking those questions, because it will lead us to expanding our way of being in the world and influencing the world in the way we want to influence the world, rather than the way we may have been programmed to influence the world.
Amen. Now we're back to change and transformation. Oh my God, everything's connected. Bob, final comments?
I believe it is, Chubbs. I believe it is. Let's all, I'll speak directly to our listeners. Let's all try and let our children be as open as possible. Let's try to put fewer and fewer restrictions on the way they think, even though we have to restrict sometimes the way they act.
Amen.
But let them stay in touch with the universe.
Yeah. And I'll tell you, listen. Man, you just listen to them. They have these narratives going that are just amazing. So listen. So where do we go next? You know, it all started with farmers growing more than they could keep, more than they could eat, created a surplus. And once there was surplus, a couple of the kids of the farmers said, "Hey, I don't want to be a farmer. I want to be a potter. I want to be I want to build with wood. I wanna." And it grew and it grew and it grew until eventually human society created culture, science, industry, and we had to have some way to govern it all. My gosh, civilization. I'll be honest, every time I get in a plane and I look out, I am totally blown away at civilization. I'm serious, man. It is an event beyond my comprehension. As I mentioned early in the show, one of the things that I asked when I was 5 was, how does the world work? And I'm still working on it. And I'll tell you, civilization blows my mind. What a gift. What a confounding conundrum of a gift. My friends, next week, we're going to take the deep end into civilization and see what we can see. Till then, many blessings, and in all things, may you see with the eyes of a child.